solar plexus, and there you meditate on it, anicca, 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 and that you have to do quite a while. In the Burmese culture, the elephant has an even gait. It is one of the 32 characteristics of Lord Buddha. Not understanding what Vipassana was about, I was only doing it. Even when I was a teenager, because it's a sin and I run about, I've done something bad. But I was not so doubtful because I was willing to take U Ba Khin as a teacher because I'm absolutely ignorant about the field of meditation. I'm only learning it. The meeting of U Ba Khin and Webu Sayadaw, that was during the war. It was very close to the Japanese time. And then he heard that there is a monk practicing meditation in a cave. And so when, after his work was finished, he was trying to meet him, and then he met him.
May all beings be happy, and may peace prevail in the world.
What is Burma's leading export? Commodities like jade, rubber, and teak might quickly come to mind, but personally, I would argue that Myanmar's most significant export to the global community is far less tangible: the gift of meditation. Rooted in traditions preserved by generations of Burmese monks and lay meditation teacher, this export transcends borders, enriching lives not with material goods, but with tools for mindfulness and insight. Even more amazing, it's a commodity that is freely given without any payment demanded in return. Our podcast frequently explores how this quiet revolution from the Golden Land has touched hearts and minds across the globe. And the interview that follows touches upon similar themes. Let's listen in. You're about to hear an interview with Friedgard Lottermoser. This is the second interview that we've released on this platform. We spoke to Friedgard for a total of 45 hours, and the first episode was 2 hours. This is 1 hour, and so listeners are being treated to the third of 45 hours with this remarkable woman. We definitely recommend that listeners go back and check out the first episode if you haven't done so already. One note about these conversations with her: Friedgard spoke to our platform with the condition that none of these episodes could be released until her passing. And so that is why we are very carefully now releasing these to the world. And I'm very pleased to be able to present this third hour with her, which is full of so much information and so much to hear about her stories of Burma and meditation and her life. Before we get into this 1 hour, we're joined by Ujagra, who is a monk who spent extended time in Myanmar, and he's going to help us to talk about this interview with Friedgard, to understand it at a deeper level. I find that Friedgard's talk it brings so many layers and nuances. It's so dense that every time I hear it, I hear something else. And every time, every listener I speak to that also comes and hears her talk, they hear things that I don't catch. And so I think it's very valuable to be able to check in with another guest and another listener to this and try to pick apart some of the great nuance and layers and density of Friedgard's talk to really get the most out of this very special series. So with that introduction, I would like to introduce Ujagra. Before we get into talking about Friedgard, I would like to ask Ujagra if you can give a brief background of who you are and your involvement. And I should mention that we've recorded a series of interviews with you and haven't yet come out. And so that's why listeners might not know about you. We'll be releasing this episode with Friedgard first. So your story will be coming out in short order. But for those who don't know about you and your background, if you can share a little bit about your time in Burma.
Yes, thank you, Joe. And also, we have the chance to listen to this very rare interview with Friedgard, that was a very special person. So, in this relationship, then I can say eventually where I met her, because I knew her personally, and my background is that I am from Canada, from the French speaking part, and when I was a teenager, I was interested in meditation. My brother had gone to India, and he introduced me a little bit, and at some point I wanted to have a real teacher. So I heard that there was a few teachers appointed by U Ba Khin, and they were starting to teach. And somehow we contacted Mr. Robert Hover, who was in California, and then we asked him what type of retreats he was offering nowadays. And he said that he was on his way to Europe, and he was planning to give a couple of retreats in Germany, and also a couple of retreats in Switzerland. So very enthusiastically, I asked him if I could join. He said, yeah, of course. So I ended up there, and it was really very nice, because it was just young kind of hippies coming from India, and then all kinds of we could say freaks, but young seekers, and all very original and very interested. And it was with the retreat. So this was, important time of my life, and the experience with Mr. Hover also really impacted me. But the thing is that sometimes later, maybe must have been, I think, maybe 30 years later, or about. Anyway, I was in Burma, in a monastery in the mountains, and just like that, a German nun, kind of elderly lady, appeared to my place, and she had heard about me, and she introduced herself, and we find out that we were practicing also with the same tradition of U Ba Khin. And then when she asked me, where did you start to practice? And I said, well, in Switzerland, and in 74. And the course was with Mr. Hover. And she said, well, I was the manager of that course. So she was actually, the retreat manager. And I remembered now, I remember her as a young lady. She must have been about, her early 30s. And so anyway, there was a kind of friendship there that was established on a common ground of Dhamma. And from there, we had long discussions, for hours of all kinds of things, and about meditation especially, and also about her life, and specific encounters that she had with these great people. Because it's what is interesting is that she, with her age, with her experience, she is able to give us a look that is fresh about now these idealized teachers that are not there anymore, but she was there.
Thank you so much. And it's amazing to hear your background and how it intersects with Friedgard in that way, how we're all connected. And yes, I think it's great to bring this interview to our listeners. Before we do, just one question to set it up. So after we hear Friedgard's 1-hour interview, we'll come back and we'll talk and give some commentary and analysis of what we've heard. But going into the interview, what What would you like to encourage our listeners to pay attention to? What would you like to put in their mind and set the context for what follows so they get the most out of it?
What follows, what struck me is that she was a teenager in these days, and from a quite very well educated background, and then a good family, and she was balanced and all of that. So, nevertheless, she was hungry. She was really hungry for a spiritual meaning, a kind of meaning of life, and she was attracted with meditation because she definitely intuited that this is what she wants. So when she joined, the retreats, although U Ba Khin apparently was not that enthusiastic to have that young girl in a retreat, but the enthusiasm that she had, the faith that she had, and the confidence that she had in her heart just to do these things. So this kind of enthusiasm, I think, will be worth for us to wake up a little bit and to say, well, there is some meat there, huh? And if we really do these things, you have results, and it's a path that is based on. It's based on intelligence, based on something else, but it's something concrete. So I think that's the main thing that can be striking about it. And also, of course, the way that she describes the meditation that she was going through. This is also interesting. But definitely, the enthusiasm and the devotion and the faith that she had with the teacher, and also with the practice and the result that she got out of it. Also, what is funny also in this regard is that at the beginning she didn't know what she was doing. She was not understanding exactly what was the meditation all about, but she did it. She did it, and just after a few months or a few years, then the understanding came to be built up into herself, and eventually she came to, for those who don't know, she became quite a scholar. She did a MA on the aspects of Abhidhamma, the Patana, and this Patana is the chant that U Ba Khin is using at the beginning of his retreats, and also she did a PhD thesis on the all commentaries that were the source, the material for the Visuddhimagga, that was compiled in Sri Lanka. So she did this research, but again, it's a kind of enthusiasm that you are not getting involved if there was not a very deep sense of inspiration. So definitely she was inspired so much, not only by the Buddhism, but also by the people who lived it. And then one thing that she said at some point, she said that if we want to understand the Burmese people, then we have to practice meditation. Because meditation practice opens you up to the dimensions that come together with the philosophy and the way of life that the traditional Buddhists have, and especially the Burmese. It's so much ingrained in their culture. It has so much influence their way of living that if you are not in touch with that, well, you cannot understand them, really.
Thank you. That's so remarkable. And I just want to give a couple of comments before we get into Friedgard's interview to further set the stage and context for listeners. So after we recorded the first interview that has already been published and has been released, and hopefully listeners have heard by now, we then set an appointment for the next interview. I don't know how long it was, maybe a week or so. And when we started talking again, and what's remarkable is I want listeners to pay close attention to really the first 30 seconds or so of this interview, because it starts out with this almost overwhelming eagerness on the part of Friedgard that was like it was burning in her this whole time, that she had ended that interview 2 hours talking and she had just gotten into the meditation and hadn't been able to describe in the detail she wanted. And so just explodes on the scene with like, I didn't even ask a question. It was just like, I need to tell you all of this. And then it was just, just this outpouring of detail and technical discovery and explanation of what she was going through and how she felt about it. And, it was remarkable to me at the time, and it's more so listening back now, that if you hear these interviews back to back, it sounds like she was just continuing where she picked off. And she was continuing where she picked off, but it was with a hiatus of about a week. But she was just holding it in her mind with such force and conviction and excitement, to want to cover what she couldn't before, and such clarity of what she wanted to say, that it really stood out, that she just began this knowing exactly where she wanted to go. And again, we've done 45 hours of interviews. This was the third hour. This was before we had really established a strong rapport and dialogue and connection. So she was carrying that. And then along with that, when the last 15 hours we recorded with her was in person in Sri Lanka, and I saw something similar in her, this dichotomy between the how she might talk in dealing with mundane matters of the world, and when the conversation would turn to meditation or to Burma. She was also very passionate about democracy and human rights and the people of Burma. And when she would come into our place of recording, she would, as someone who was in older years, would have the difficulties associated with that, and have to care for the health problems happening. But when she sat in that chair, she would have, and I can't wait until people can see this, because this is recorded on a high resolution video. I can't wait until this becomes available. She would light up and look like she was 30 years old. She was brilliant. She would focus on what she wanted to say and just pinpoint laser precision, talking for hours at a time without any questions or prompts, and telling stories that would have us listening, sometimes holding back tears and sometimes holding back laughter. They were so enthralling. It was so remarkable to me to see this shift. And when she realized that it was time for her to talk about Burma or about meditation, this absolute clarity. And that's what listeners get in these first few minutes, and certainly the whole hour, but in the first few minutes, you really hear this eagerness and exactitude coming out. And so I think that's a great way to set the scene. And so with that, let us pause here and treat listeners to the conversation that follows from last year with Friedgard Lottermoser.
So during my first course, when the 10 days were over, Sayagyi U Ba Khin asked us to stay a few days more, because in the coming week there was an important festival, and if we were staying longer, then we would make significant progress in meditation. My mother didn't want to stay because in that week was my stepfather's birthday. But I was thinking that he will have another birthday next year, and I stayed then. And so I was there alone. And during these 4 days, I had this special experience, which was special for U Ba Khin's teaching. It is not taught by Goenka, but Goenka sometimes refers to it. And there is a special procedure. It is only for the people who are advanced in the Vipassana meditation. So they experience the 10 stages mentioned in the Visuddhimagga. Maybe we go to it another stage, talking about the 10 stages of Vipassana mentioned in the Visuddhimagga.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I do it briefly. You start with the Vipassana, you go through several stages. Now, in Goenka's meditation, the stage of bhaṅga, which is about the third stage, and sometimes also referred to as free flow, is popularized as being very important, because only then you can understand change fully. But it's not the end of the different stages of Vipassana. And so at the end of it, that is not for everyone. It depends on the parami of the meditator. So then you come to a stage where perceiving the change inside the body gets less and less and less. and then it gets very subtle, and then you have to do it carefully, and you go through the body again and again to see whether in some corner there is still something stuck up that will come and rise, and then will come to the center of your solar plexus, and there you meditate on it, anicca, 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 and that you have to do quite a while. And only when there's nothing left in the body, that would feed, this awareness of your individuality in the center of the body, then only U Ba Khin would try this ceremony. And there was a little bit of formula that he was there, and then someone to watch also was developed. And then he would meditate together with the student, and then he would say, you take a brief, he said, when I say time's up, let go. Then you take a breath, you put some pressure on this subtle sensation in the middle of your body, just like tipping on it, but with your mind. And then let go of it. So that was the procedure. And so then he said that when I heard the words, time's up, then I did as he instructed. And then after a while, this experience was finished. But in some cases, it is very brief, just a moment. In some cases, it's very long. So in the case of Mrs. Ruth Dennison, she achieved it for 1 whole hour. And in her diary, she wrote, but it seemed to be just a moment. So actually, you experience the absence of any sankharas. And so you can't describe it. You can only see the effects on yourself afterwards. And for that, I had to be taught. You feel very light. U Ba Khin said to me later, see how you walk. You walk like an elephant, which I didn't understand at all because I thought elephants are very clumsy. But in the Burmese culture, the elephant has an even gait. It is one of the 32 characteristics of Lord Buddha. He walks evenly and measured. And then sometimes there is a sensation of coolness along your spine. So the 2 accounts I know about where it is described in writing is the diary of Ruth Dennison, and the other one is a statement written by Mr. Hislop, where he describes the procedure, but he did not actually attain the state. But he describes it in writing, and there were several attempts. So at that time, I must say, I went home after these 2 weeks, and then I did another course in next month, in April. And during that course, I wrote a letter to my mother, or after the course, the second 10-day course. My mother was not in Burma at the time. She had to go back to Germany because the half year was over, and she had to sell her medical practice because we are going to stay 3 years more in Burma. So I wrote to her, and I found that letter some time ago, and I was very surprised because I said, oh, this second 10-day course was not as calm as the first one. I was full of upheavals and uncertainty. And then I said, but maybe that is how it has to be. So that means I was actually not understanding what Vipassana was about. I was only doing it. It took me several courses to understand the gradual process and what is repeating.
I just had some questions about the specialized instructions that U Ba Khin gave you that you describe. It's so interesting to hear that. First question is just these instructions that were given to you and given to other advanced students, given their state and what Mother Sayama and perhaps others were sensing, were they uniform in the sense that once someone was close or something was sensed, these instructions were then given, or were they customized in the sense that depending on who the person was, their background, the state they were at, the evaluations made, a different set of customized instructions were given according to the person?
No, it was the same procedure, but it absolutely depended only on the development in meditation of the individual teacher, and whether he was ripe for it or not, that was judged by U Ba Khin and with the advice of Mother Sayama. No?
And do you know if Goenka himself was ever given these set of instructions as a meditator by U Ba Khin as a teacher?
Well, there are some people who cannot attain this state, but that means their parami may be even greater. But Goenka calls it the Nibbanic dip. He is talking about it in the long courses. I have done a number of 45-day courses, but not in such an open way as U Ba Khin did. So you have to know what he's talking about, but he does mention it. And that means if the parami is very great, and that there are people that will continue in samsara until Arimathea comes, and they will be close disciples of Arimathea Buddha. So their parami in the present time, which is the sasana of Gautama Buddha, is already very great, because that coming Buddha is more powerful even than Gautama, according to Theravada theory.
And then, in your experience of having received these instructions and practiced them, the experience of these advanced instructions and the experience you had while following them, did you feel like a changed person afterwards?
Well, I found that out only when I came home, no? Because, I mean, remember, it was my first course, and I was there only 2 weeks. No? And it happened in the 4 days when I was without my mother. So after the first course, what I observed is now I know Vipassana, and that means I didn't have to run about with a bad conscience. Because, I've been quite a religious-minded person even from childhood, because my grandmother read the Bible every day and she looked after me in the absence of my mother for several years. But I had this one weakness that I like food. And so, because I was born during the war, after the war, when we were we always taught to eat everything that came on our plate and not to waste food and finish everything and not to choose. So when I was in West Germany as a teenager, our mother used to buy apples and oranges. So we could eat as many apples as we wanted, but the oranges, we had only one each. And so if a hungry teenager wants to have another orange, she's actually eating the sister's orange. And then you do that and you run about with a bad conscience because you have done that. You've taken what is not given to you. And you have no means to replace it, because I can't just go off with my pocket money to buy another orange. I will have to go to the market, and maybe my pocket money was not enough for that. And so as a teenager, before we came to Burma, I suffered a lot from these little things. Or maybe I secretly knew where my mother kept her key to her cupboard, and she had locked the chocolate, and I knew the key. I took the key and I ate a piece of chocolate, things like that. And that used to trouble me even when I was a teenager, because it's a sin and I run about, I've done something bad. But if you have Vipassana meditation, for one thing, you don't need to have a bad conscience, because the karma is already done. You can't change it. But on the other hand, if you practice your meditation, you can reduce the urge to do the wrong thing. And that is something you can do yourself. You don't need to have to pray and please Christ and God help me to resist. You
Right.
sit down, you practice your Vipassana, and the urge to do the wrong thing dissolves. I find that very, very valuable even after my first course.
Right. And then after that first course and those specialized instructions you received, did you feel that you yourself reached any kind of state, or did Mother Sayama or U Ba Khin affirm or inform you of anything?
I didn't feel, they informed me. And they said it was only very brief. But one thing is, after that course and after this event, they came and asked me whether Dr. Kerner was not my father. And I was very surprised, because we came there with Dr. Kerner and his wife and his daughters. And we were 3 of us, actually. My mother had 5 children. But he was our stepfather. We didn't go to Burma and said, oh, this is Dr. Kerner and we are his stepchildren. No? And we went as his daughters. So they had no means of knowing that he is not my own father. But they asked me after the first course. And then I said, yes, so Dr. Kerner is my stepfather. And apparently it is so that when I finished my meditation and the meditation was good, they shared the merits with my parents. And my father, who was already dead at that time, came and he said, Sadhu, look at me, look at this girl who is meditating.
Your father came. What do you mean by that?
From another, wherever he was reborn.
And how did you experience that? Were you informed
No,
of that?
that was noticed by Mother Sayama, who can see things.
Oh my gosh!
And
Wow.
it's not the only occasion that has happened. I've heard about another occasion where a dead person who is closely related to a meditator, when sharing of merit is taking place, can come.
So this was after your first course that you were
After my
informed.
first course.
And so you're 17 years old. You've taken your first ever experience of meditation, and you're then being informed after that course that your dead father has come to rejoice in your merits. How did you make sense of that at that age, at that time?
Well, I thought it is a Buddhist view, but I was not so doubtful because I was willing to take U Ba Khin as a teacher because I'm absolutely ignorant about the field of meditation. I'm only learning it. No. But I said, oh, that's very strange because you must see that I hardly know my father. I have met him 3 times of my life. It is almost nothing. For brief periods when I was a very small child. No?
Amazing. What was your impression of Mother Sayama and the time you spent around her?
Well, I didn't question her gift. She was the one. I think I've told you that on the first day when U Ba Khin told me how to do anapana, and I hyperventilated because I thought you have to breathe, and I breath like that. And then he went to office and he wasn't there. So then a woman opened the door and looked at me, and she didn't speak English. And she showed with her hands that I shouldn't breathe so hard. And then she showed me how to breathe softly and showing with her hands. That was Mother Sayama. Her husband, Uchitin, he was working in U Ba Khin's office. But his native town was Moulmein, and Moulmein is also the place where Mother Sayama was born, either in the city or in a village. But when she married, she was an orphan, and she was brought up by her grandmother, and she didn't have any siblings, only a cousin. And so she didn't have a good education. She learned how to cook and how to make herself pretty, but she only could write her name. She couldn't even read and write Burmese fluently.
She was illiterate.
Yeah. But later, of course, she has been to England and all that. So definitely, by the time she died, when she was more than 90, she could speak some English. And I have also seen that she could write her name. Because we went to Sayagyi's place and there she signed the guest book. She had married an educated man, and she lived with him in the city. And she came as a meditator. Her daughter was born. She was 24. When she took meditation, she was 26, very young. And of course, by that time, she lived already several years in Rangoon. It is only before her marriage that she was in this situation. And she picked up, of course, the habits of how to be a Rangoon lady, but it wasn't her background. She had to acquire it. But that doesn't mean her manners were very soft-spoken and very gentle, and she had very fair skin. She was pretty also. I remember her that she spent a long time on putting the Tanaka on her face. You know, that's the Burmese pass the woman put on their face.
Was it unusual, or did it stand out that Sayagyi U Ba Khin would have recognized a woman, and it sounds like a young woman at that, as having reached this advanced stage and really, in essence, promoting her to greater position at the center at that time? I mean, it was enough that you had Sayagyi U Ba Khin as a layperson that was teaching meditation, but he was an older man who was experienced and he had a government position. Mother Sayama at that time was a younger woman without that standing.
He was 25 years older than Mother Sayama, U Ba Khin. But Uchitin, I know that all from Dosusu. Dosusu knew Mother Sayama very well, but Dosusu had a British grandfather and she was educated in a mission school. But she was born in Burma. She spent all her life in Burma. And when Mother Sayama was developed, she was very close to her. And she explained it to me, that she accepted her as having a greater parami. And at the beginning, when Mother Sayama learned how to meditate, I wasn't there. So I only go by what Dosusu told me. She had a very fast development. And in fact, in case of Mother Sayama, before she started to meditate, her husband went there first. Now, because her husband was in U Ba Khin's office, and U Ba Khin taught meditation to. He didn't teach women at the beginning.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think Dosusu was the first woman he taught, and
why is that?
Well, he thought maybe meditation is like a monk, and he is a man, so he should teach only men.
I see.
No?
And what made him change his mind?
Well, because his disciples were family people, and they wanted their wives and family also to meditate. They persuaded him. But it was particularly Dosusu, who was a widow, who became the first chief disciple. And Mother Sayama came to see U Ba Khin 2 years later only. And the first experience of meditation I've heard about Mother Sayama is that she asked her husband, now you are spending so much time with U Ba Khin meditation, so what do you do there? And they were at home going to sleep. They were sitting on their bed. So her husband Uchitin sat up and he told her how to do anapana. Sitting down, you have to do your breathing. That was at home, not in the meditation center, and no U Ba Khin about. And then Mother Sayama sat down for about 1 minute or two, and she did the breathing, and then she saw a big light, a yellow light. And then she said, oh, if you meditate, you see a bar of soap. And then she went to sleep. But that means the past parami came. Who can see a bar of soap after meditation for 1 minute of anapana? A big bar of soap. So later, when she took the 10-day course and so on, her development was very fast. And it was not so easy also for her. It was hard on her because when she came to very high stages, she needed protection because the environment is not all favorable. You pick up negative vibrations from the environment. So there were stages when she was sick and she was unconscious and all that. But her family were all meditators. So by and by, of course, she could understand that. But the very difficult meditators, Mother Sayama never faced. She only watched them from a distance, and then she told others to go and tell them so and so.
What do you mean, difficult meditators?
Oh, someone who came with very negative forces. That is sometimes, maybe you are a Jesuit who only wants to learn to test U Ba Khin Vipassana, whether it's useful for spreading Christianity in Burma.
That happened?
That did happen, yes. If U Ba Khin thought that he can teach the person, he would accept them.
These are incredible stories. Maybe we can tell them one by one. The first story involves you started a Jesuit coming who with a Christian background. Tell us what happened with him.
I don't know details. I'm just mentioning as a case. I heard about it only remotely. But what I do more in detail is that the wife of an American ambassador who lived, she lived in Thailand, and she was very interested in meditation, and she tried various meditations. I don't know in many countries, but maybe particularly in Thailand. And then she came to Burma, U Ba Khin, and she was very impressed, and they accepted her for 10 days. But they had so much difficulty teaching her that they didn't want to accept her again.
Why was that? What was the difficulty?
The mental forces that were associated with her were very hard to handle.
And did they know why or what type of forces these were?
Well, they wouldn't go into a tale, and particularly they wouldn't say that to her face because it's very impolite.
Yeah, that's a pretty intense thing to hear.
Yeah, but so they made an excuse. No? But internally, I heard that they didn't want to accept her because they were scared.
of the forces that were within her.
Yeah, because the teacher who is teaching, he is in contact, and he's fighting with these forces. No?
Wow.
So in my case, in my first course, there was no difficulty. But later, when my family didn't come and we lived in this military compound, U Ba Khin gave a lot of attention to me for about 6 months. And I had another course which was 1 month longer, that was in October. And I repeated this experience, which I just described in the first course, and it was longer. It was about 8 minutes. And after that, he expected that maybe my father would see that and would also take a meditation course. Even U Ba Khin came to our house to visit it. And, I told you about the birds of Burma, the present he gave. And he often asked me, does your father watch the birds? Explaining to me that if he watching the birds and using the book, then he remember that it is a gift from U Ba Khin, like this. But my father was too busy. And he was involved in all that. He was not living in a military compound when he met U Ba Khin in Germany. He did that only in Burma. And only the 3.5 years in Burma was the only time he worked for that firm even. After when he left Germany, he left the firm also. He found some other employment. So I had about 6 months, which was a gradual introduction to meditation. I went to the meditation very often, almost every weekend. And because I was not at home during the time when my sisters did their driving license and things like this, so my mother tried to stop me, but I couldn't be stopped. And then there was the event 6 months later in October when U Ba Khin asked me to bring a written statement that my parents agreed for me to take this 1 month education, 1 month's meditation. And my mother wasn't too keen on signing it, but I said, if you don't sign it, if you don't sign it, I will run away. I will go back to Germany and get a job and save money, and then I'll do it. So she had to do it. The way teenagers are, they can be quite forceful. So she did sign it. Of course, I didn't say that to U Ba Khin, but you didn't have to tell him. He would know. He would know because the mental vibrations are quite different. They could sense that. Of course, at that time, I wasn't so sensitive. So that was a successful course. But after coming back to my home, there was no difference. My family didn't appreciate. And then U Ba Khin tried to tell me not to come to meditate. It was about a year. I had a really hard time. I came whenever he permitted me. And I tried to meditate at home, and eventually I left home. I came to the students' hostel. My mother didn't want that also, no? But eventually she had to say yes, because I must tell you, you know enough about the world that teenagers mostly, if they're determined, they can make their parents do the things they want. No? And only sometimes I was thinking, well, my mother has 5 daughters. I have only one mother. So if she doesn't agree, I can't go and ask another one. Okay.
These are just wonderful stories. My mind is so full of different things I want to know, and I want to bring your voice and experiences to our listeners. It's just so wonderful. So I'm wondering where to go next. Maybe the logical next progression is hearing more of your story as you progress, because as you're following U Ba Khin and becoming developed as a meditator, we do learn more about the context and your interaction with the people in the center and everything else. So I think in our explorations and tangents, we've left off after this first course that you were asked to stay longer for. You then took a second course, which you reference as being hard. So talk about your next half year or so of developing and taking courses, learning more about U Ba Khin, the other people at the center itself, and Myanmar as well, if that fits into it in your story.
Yeah, I must tell you that I absolutely forgot that I had taken a 10-day course in April. I only found that letter, which I've written to my mother, about talking about it. That is the evidence that I did take a course, and it was very, very troubled. And I was blissfully saying, oh, or maybe that is because ups and downs of life and so on. That means I understood really nothing about the nature of Vipassana. I was still in a very, even though I had this deep experience, but I didn't know how it works in everyday life if you practice it. But in the next month, in May, that is the full moon of Vesak, Buddha's Day of Enlightenment, there was the visit of Venerable Webu Sayadaw in U Ba Khin Center. And I stayed there while he came. That was not a meditation course, but this was very interesting because he came with a retinue of several monks. And there were many disciples of U Ba Khin who came every day and offered food to the monks. And then the Venerable Webu Sayadaw would give a sermon. And I didn't know Burmese, so those who had to tell me in brief what he had said. And then there was this American Dilashin Medavi. She was my neighbor. We had to sleep in the caves, the lower caves, because the center was so full. And I think I've told you about Medavi when we talked about
Yes,
many
and
years ago.
yes, her story is fascinating, and I'm going to have to ask you to tell the full story again for our audience.
The meeting of U Ba Khin and Webu Sayadaw, that was during the war. No, it was very close to the Japanese time, but U Ba Khin still had the job with the British government where he controlled the accounts for the railways. That is how he came to Jiaoze. And then he heard that there is a monk practicing meditation in a cave. And so when after his work was finished, he was trying to meet him. And then he met him. And he's often talked about it, how it was, how he lived in a little bamboo hut. And the people said, oh, a layperson, don't go here. The Sayadaw never comes out at this time. He doesn't meet people. He comes only for his meals. And so U Ba Khin couldn't wait until, because he was a visitor in Jiaoze and his work was finished. So he just was outside the bamboo hut and he paid respects to him. And then he said, I think mentally, or whether he's both mentally as well as verbally, and said, Venerable Sir, I've come here from Rangoon. I'm also a meditator, Buddhist meditator, and I'd like to meet you. And then, to the great surprise of the nuns who were there, the door was open and Webu Sayadaw came out in the accompaniment of a swarm of mosquitoes, because he stayed there without a mosquito net inside. And he talked to him. And Webu Sayadaw talked to U Ba Khin about Vipassana. And Webu Sayadaw asked him, well, layperson, how did you practice? And how do you practice Vipassana? And U Ba Khin said, oh, even now as I talk to you, I can experience the rise and fall in my body. So then Webu said, oh, that is very amazing. Did you stay in a cave for a long time? Then U Ba Khin said, no, I went to the other side, the village where Sayagyi was teaching us, and I stayed only a few days. And I learned Anapana and Vipassana. And then I went back to Rangoon and continued to practice, and sometimes the teacher came and visited me. Mm-hmm. And then Webu Sayadaw said, this is very amazing. I had to practice in here alone with not meeting anybody for a long time. Your parami must be very great. And you should teach this to others, because that is Buddha's instruction. So on the very first meeting there in Jiaoze, in the bamboo hut, in front of the bamboo hut, Webu Sayadaw reinforced U Ba Khin and encouraged him and told him to start teaching. Don't wait, he said. Mm-hmm. No? And so that is why, because he was instructed by this venerable monk who was a hermit and advanced meditator, U Ba Khin started to teach on the same day. And his first disciple was the railway superintendent of Jiaoze Railway. And he had to sit on a table in the railway carriage, because that's the only facilities they had to do meditation. But the thing happened when the British were there. Otherwise, U Ba Khin wouldn't have been doing this inspection of the accounts. Mm-hmm. No?
Right.
Because he did it only until the Japanese took over the country.
That first meeting, then something like 11 or 13 years later, that led the way for Webu Sayadaw to eventually come to Rangoon and visit IMC. That is not the visit you're describing, but maybe you can share what you know of that first visit by Webu Sayadaw, just to give some context, and then describe the visit that you took part in.
So, by and by, after the war, Webu Sayadaw got well known as an arahat, but he still didn't go anywhere. It is only the local people in Jause who respected him. And then some people from town who heard about it. And then after U Ba Khin had started his meditation center, it may have been about 1953, I'm not definite about it. No? Then he wanted to invite Webu Sayadaw to visit him in Rangoon. And the people said, oh, he won't come, he never leaves Jause. But U Ba Khin said, never mind. And he sent 2 of his senior disciples to Jause and invite him. So these 2 people came back, and to their great surprise, the Sayadaw, who never went anywhere, he said, oh, U Ba Khin, meditation. Then he said, oh, you want to invite me? Yes, I will come. When are we going? He was ready to come straight away. Well, so of course they had to make him wait until the next day, because they had to arrange the railway tickets for him to go down to Rangoon. And then he stayed several days at IMC. This visit is described by the Kapiya of Webu Sayadaw, who was very close to him, but the description is not quite right, because as far as I've heard from IMC, it was really he came because he wanted to visit IMC. But this Kapiya, at that time, he was not so close to U Ba Khin. He was a neighbor of U Ba Khin, but he didn't meditate with U Ba Khin because he was drinking alcohol, and he thought that if he meditates with U Ba Khin, he'll have to stop drinking alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what his nephew told me later after he was dead. Okay, so he mentions another lady. So at least Webu Sayadaw was invited by many people after that. And when I met him, it was 1960 in May. So there are at least 7 years between his first visit to IMC and the visit where I was present.
So that captures us up to speed on who Webu Sayadaw is and something of U Ba Khin and Webu's relationship. There's much more detail to go into that we'll hopefully explore over the course of these conversations. But I think that gives enough background to understand what was happening in this May visit that you described. So this is I believe you're still 17 years old at this time. You've just taken your first course. You're new to Burma. And now you find yourself with your friend Susu at IMC as the famous and the revered Webu Sayadaw is taking another visit to the center and to U Ba Khin. So describe this.
Yeah, well, he was the first monk I ever met.
Oh.
Yeah, and it was exactly 2 months after my first meditation course at IMC.
Mm-hmm.
And before he came, U Ba Khin had told me that he was an arahat. So, of course, we have respect for him.
Mm-hmm.
But I couldn't speak enough Burmese. I couldn't hear what he was saying. I had to rely on the Susu, and she didn't give me a full translation. She gave a summary of what he said.
Mm-hmm.
What I remember about is that on one occasion he said to the lay audience that even though we were lay people and they were meditating, it was all very good, but they should also keep the 8 precepts not only during the meditation course, but also as much as they could, emphasizing on sila.
Mm-hmm.
No? But the other things I don't remember, but simply I learned a lot. I must say that this meditation experience in March was really my key to understanding the Burmese people. Even though even though I had already been in Burma several months.
Mm-hmm. How so?
Yeah. Well, it is because there were many Burmese people, and I started to wear Burmese dress. I couldn't get many because I had to buy the cloth from my pocket money, and that was not very big. So I had 2 sets, one set, then later another one. But my second indi, I don't know, one of them was cut by Mother Sayama. because I took
Oh.
it. Yeah, I bought a lungi that, of course, my mother permitted us. We could choose what we wanted. So that is, of course, just a single seam. So it becomes a lungi. Then you have to add a black piece on top. But about the blouse, I had to use a piece of cloth that was given to us free because there was a German man who was trying to sell cloth in Burma, and he had samples, and these samples he didn't want anymore. So my second set of lungi and blouse was what he gave us. It was not made in Burma. It was made in Germany to sell it in Burma, and it was a free gift, and that was my second. And Mother Sayama cut the blouse. I don't know. Maybe I gave it to a tailor. It was very thin lace, so it was difficult to make. Yeah, and not only that, also I understood much more. You see, my other sister, who also went to university for 3 years, pre-medical, but she mixed with the Anglo-Indians, and she drove a car, and she didn't. Medical students, of course, are not so interested in Burmese culture. So even after my parents and my two sisters, after staying in Burma for 3 years, they didn't really know what Burmese food is. That much. But I ate it at the center because they cooked there. Later, when I stayed with a Burmese family and my mother came to visit me and stayed with this family, and she said to me, I thought that our cook was making Burmese food. But the Burmese food I eat here, that tastes much better. And I tell you, the cook we had was not a professional cook, and he cooked what the previous cook had told him the Westerners want to eat, and they thought it's Burmese food. You are so isolated, if you only stick to the embassy and the
Sure.
group of Westerners.
And when you were at IMC and spending more time there, were you one of the only, if not the only foreigner most of the time who was
Most
involved
of the
in
time.
the...
Yes, most of the time. Most of the time. Of course, the first visit, I was with my parents, so with 3 of us, and the first course, my mother was there. And then in May, when Webu Sayadaw came, Mamidawi was there. She's American. But afterwards, I don't, at least in the first half year, I didn't meet any other foreigners.
This was
At the center.
1959?
No, it was in 1960.
1960. Okay, so I was thinking about the year because, of course, Goenka's first course was 1955. So you would have been involved in the center 5 years on from his first course. He was regularly taking courses at that time, but he was also a very involved businessman with lots of lay responsibilities, at least until 1962 in the coup. So I'm wondering what kind of presence Goenka was at the center during those events and the meditation, and just what you saw of him integrating as a student into what was happening at IMC.
Well, U Ba Khin used to tell the story how he had the migraine headache. And he came to meditate because of that, and he wouldn't accept him if he came only for medical reasons. Because he said, I will teach you only if you come there to get out of suffering, but you don't need to be a Buddhist. And your migraine headache will disappear as a side effect. But I won't teach you just to cure your headache. That is the main thing. And that story he told frequently because it so happened that the headache was better the moment Goenka promised to do the course, even before he started meditation. And then when he thought he thought he didn't need to meditate because the headache was gone, it came back because he didn't keep his promise.
I see. Wow.
Because he was so integrated in his Hindu community, with Hinduism, because his father particularly, he was such a traditional Hindu. The grandfather came from Rajasthan to Burma, and he did that because he liked Burma. Even though he was an Indian and it was a British province of India at the time when he came. But he even went to Mandalay, where the royal king was still there, outside the British field, and he did business. His grandfather. But his father, Goenka's father, who was born in Burma, he was a very traditional, staunch Hindu. He was a poor man, and young. I think Goenka has written about it like there's a young man from Rajasthan came and he rode a camel, then he took a train, then in Calcutta he took a boat, finally he reached Rangoon and he started a business, and then he thought he would earn more if he went to the native Raja's place because there was not so much competition from other traders. And then he hired mules and they sold cloth and went to the Shan states, the mountains, not in the royal court. And he had all his cash in a belt, rupees, silver rupees, his grandfather. And once he forgot it, and he noticed it only too late after they had already several hours trade with the mules. And then he was very frightened because all his capital was in this belt, and he had left it at the open. It's an open building where anyone can spend the night, but it is not locked and there's no furniture in it. So if he thought if he comes back after 2 weeks, it's gone. But the muleteer said no, he refused to return. He said, we have gone too far. Don't worry. Anyone who sees it will know it doesn't belong to him. And then he didn't believe it. He was already counting his loss. And then after he came back, after several weeks, definitely his belt with the silver was there. That is how honest the Burmese society was before it was sort of subjected to upheaval. And under the Burmese kings, there is even a story that a diamond ring was left on the marketplace in Mandalay in the middle of the road, and for several days no one touched it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And so when you were starting to come around the center, Goenka was becoming an old student. He had taken a course 5 years ago. What kind of presence was he around there?
And I never met him, actually.
I see.
That is one thing, is because we didn't have strict gender separation, but there was a sort of convention. The men were on one side of the pagoda, they had their own quarters there, and the women were on the other side of the pagoda with their own. And they would meet only, say, in the dining hall, but they would sit at separate tables. And then they would meet in the Dhammayon, but I was a very young woman and he was a senior man, a married man with a family. So I knew who he was. I knew his face and what he looked like, but I don't remember talking. Yes, I remember one thing. When Webu Sayadaw came, Goenka donated a carpet to the International Meditation Center. That was meant as a covering for the preaching hall. It was a large carpet from Rajasthan, gray and blue. Before that, they would sit on the bare floor, and some of it was covered with linoleum, but not the whole floor. But on occasion of Webu Sayadaw's visit, that very big carpet was brought, and I was sitting in the Dhamma hall when they came and brought it. So I had to get up because it covered the whole floor, and I couldn't sit there because they were going to spread the carpet. That is why I know about it. That was Goenka's dana in May 1060. I think his family members were not so common in the first year when I was there. They came later. They say for one thing, the first 2 years, I didn't know many people there. I just came for meditation. And it was. So only by the time I was a little bit used, and then I knew who is who. And on the male side, I know even less, but I do know the chief disciples, the Burmese ones. And the Indian ladies, they came only later, and many of them didn't speak English. There's only one that I ever spoke to. She was fluent in English. But in the end, when all the family members of Goenka came and they wear their saris, there were so many of them that the Burmese women start to grumble. We have no place to come to the meditation center because it's full of Indians. And that was increasing after U Ba Khin had become a monk, and he decided to train Goenka to teach meditation.
When did he make that decision to start training Goenka to teach meditation?
U Ba Khin became a monk in 1965. And according to his diary, that is the book on U Ba Khin's life written by his son, where he uses U Ba Khin's diary and whatever he heard from his father. U Ba Khin was thinking that if he meditates at Webu Sayadaw's place as a monk, that will boost up his spiritual power to such an extent that finally he will be able to break the barriers, because U Ba Khin couldn't get a passport. He tried before that. He had an invitation to India, and the government had changed so much they did not cooperate. No? And
Yeah.
so after that, he thought, well, I can't go to India. I can't go outside Burma, but these foreigners are living here right under my nose, so I will teach them. And that worked then in the end.
So you're saying that your understanding is that when U Ba Khin realized that he himself would not get a passport to be able to travel abroad to teach, he realized that he couldn't rely on his own teaching in order to export this practice around the world. He needed to promote others. So his appointment of teachers was really a condition, a consequence of he himself not being able to have his own passport. Is that right?
That is so, and it is quite definitely that he made definite plans after he was a monk. Yeah, but because before that, only Mother Sayama was considered a teacher. And then Dosusu left U Ba Khin in 1965. But while she was still there, she had taken retirement because U Ba Khin was planning to go abroad. And even when her daughter had been a meditator since she was 8 years old, and then she came to university, and then U Ba Khin told the mother, let her take English as a major subject. Then if we go abroad to teach the Dhamma, two of you can be a pair to teach meditation, you and your daughter. That never materialized, but he started to make these kinds of vague plans. And then there are these appointment letters which he has written to his foreign disciples that he empowered to teach to teach meditation on his behalf, and they're all written at a special date. I think it's briefly after Goenka left or something. Goenka left to India in 1965. 69, because he got the permission to leave. He got a visa for India on a Burmese passport because his mother was in India and was sick. That was the reason.
Yeah, this is all so interesting, and just to go back to my original question, one of the reasons why I was interested about your interactions with Goenka as a student and when you first started coming around the center in 1960 is that I know he took his first course in 1955. We have these kind of check marks in his life as a student and as a teacher, and what's in between those check marks are really just a sea of ignorance that there's not much documented. Where we know that he took his first course in 55, and as you mentioned, we know when he started to be trained as a teacher, and then when he left Burma for India to begin his teaching career. But in the meantime, there's some color there and some information that I think would be very interesting to uncover. And I also know that obviously 1962 was the military coup, and so which had a very extreme effect and consequences to the non-Bamar residences, especially the Anglos and the Chinese and the Indians. They were most affected by the militarization, as well as business owners as well. And ethnic minorities, I mean, we can go on. And so I know that up to 1962, I would assume that Goenka and his family would have continued to be very involved in the successful businesses that they were running. And so my assumption, not based on any evidence that I've read or anything I've heard, but my assumption would have been that Goenka might have been something of a casual student from 55, at least until 62, when he had so many business interests to look after, but that after the military coup in 62 and after the nationalization of his business, and I think he even referenced this at one point, that his loss of business was what made him turn more towards the meditation. And so that's why I'm also curious, in 1960, which would have been 2 years before the coup, when you were still when you started going to the center, to what degree Goenka was involved there as a student, and to what degree he might have still been just a casual meditator, just coming during the limited free time he had.
Well, he did come, and I remember that that in the last 2 years they sent a bottle of milk regularly for U Ba Khin to drink with a car because milk is hard to get in Burma, and the Indians have a better access to milk.
Oh, you mean the Goenka family was giving this as a gift?
Yes, to U Ba Khin because he was
Interesting.
elderly.
Right.
But I do think it took several years until the Goenka family, particularly the ladies, were ready to do Vipassana meditation under a Burmese
Mhm.
Buddhist.
Mhm.
That is written in the book
Yeah.
by Stuart. I think we have talked about it.
Dan
Uh,
Stewart. Yeah.
you know, that visit of Webu Sayadaw in
Mhm.
March 1960, there was
Mhm.
also the Hislop family, and Mr. Hislop was a disciple of the Mahesh Yogi, who is a Hindu
Mhm.
teacher.
Mhm.
And Goenka knew that Mahesh Yogi very well. He stayed in Goenka's house when he came to Burma, that Mahesh
Mhm.
Yogi.
Mhm.
So, according to Mr. Hislop, he talked with Goenka about the difference between U Ba Khin and Mahesh Yogi,
Mhm.
and they more or less agreed that they were teaching the same thing. That
Really?
is that is far from our own impression of what the
Mhm.
actual facts were. But these
Mhm.
two people, this American who had done courses with U Ba Khin and was also in Mahesh Yogi, what is it, TM meditation, no?
Mhm. Mhm.
Uh, because he was close enough to this American Hislop was close enough to Mahesh Yogi that he came to India to acquire a piece of land where the Mahesh Yogi should have his main center in the
Mhm.
Himalayas. And
Mhm.
from there he came to Burma and started to meditate with U Ba Khin.
Mhm.
No? So both of them were aware. Because I've heard himself, U Ba Khin speak about this Mahesh Yogi when these two people were not there. And I don't think he approved of him, but he only thought it was a useful link to get other people who are interested in meditation to learn from U Ba Khin himself. No?
Mhm.
But in the case of the Goenka family, apparently U Ba Khin permitted the Goenka ladies to meditate with Mahesh Yogi in Rangoon, so they would start to meditate, even it was a Hindu meditation. And only after that they came to U Ba Khin. It
Mhm.
amazed me because if anyone else had done it, he would not have accepted them.
Mhm.
He did that because he realized that Goenka couldn't fully develop his capacity if he was surrounded by a family who drained his strengths because they didn't cooperate.
Mhm.
No? So that took a long time. And on the other hand, you're also right in that in '62. As I have said in my last interview, there was almost no change, but that was in my life. No?
Yeah.
For many others, it was a big change, and because it
Yeah.
started the wave of nationalization, it started the wave of joint ventures, which was good for my father's business.
Mhm.
But they threw out all the missionaries, and they took away Goenka's considerable fortune. They
Mhm.
nationalized it. I mean, in
Mhm.
some book they write even the military wanted to put him into prison, but that I have never heard before.
Goenka.
Yeah,
So 62, he lost everything.
I don't know whether it was '62 or shortly after that. It was not directly after the coup.
Mhm.
No, it took time, and of course they may not have started with Goenka. Because I was also not so familiar that I know their family circumstances, but I do know what happened at the university and how it came gradually. And at the
Mhm.
beginning, the Burmese public, they were quite pleased that all these Christian nuns who are educating the children, they forced the children to read the Bible in school,
Mhm.
even though the parents were Buddhists. When I first heard that, I got very angry. But that is what was common practice.
Mhm.
Even later, 5-year-old children have to go to the church, and one child was crying, "I'm Buddhist, I don't want to go to church." Then
Mhm.
the nuns are forcing him to go.
Something I've always wondered about that I wonder if you can answer is that I have read so many books and learned and talked to so many people who have given background into the 1940s, 1950s, and early 1960s of Burma. And especially if you're looking at Rangoon, this is just a fascinating and tumultuous and dynamic time of many different forces that are happening, with many from communists to fascists to democratic forces, ethnic, religious minorities, so many that are in this bubble that are acting in different ways. I've of the reading I've done and what I've learned about the major personalities of this time, and of course Ne Win after 1962. And then on the other hand, I've read and heard so much about U Ba Khin, and U Ba Khin not just as a meditation leader and meditation teacher and dedicated practitioner, but also his place in government. I'm really curious what you know of where U Ba Khin fit into this environment of Rangoon in the 1950s leading into the 60s. Do you know anything about his relationship with some of the great figures at this time, particularly like U Nu and Ne Win, and what kind of relations they had?
Well, he was close to UNU before Burmese independence and in the early years. I think when they got the piece of land and the pagoda was built, and at the inauguration of the pagoda, UNU was even present. There are photos about it. But that happened before I came to Burma. And later, when UNU was more seen in Mahasi's time, center, because that was also founded, and he supported the meditation of Mahasi Sayadaw by wanting to give them government money for the meditators. And U Ba Khin was the accountant general, and U Ba Khin was UNU was spending money the country didn't have. And the accountant general has to see that the prime minister doesn't spend money the country doesn't have. So he argued that it was very difficult to measure the success of the meditation. And that means U Ba Khin put an obstacle to the meditators in Mahasi's center to receive financial support from the UNU government. And that may have been one of the reasons why he was not on such good terms. That is, they wouldn't say that in public, but the main thing is they said that if they are disciples of a monk and U Ba Khin is a layperson, then he couldn't interfere. But it was a little bit more, he did not quite approve of his method also.
U Ba Khin did not approve of UNU's method.
Of Mahasi's method.
Oh, of Mahasi's method. I see. So I was under... So U Ba Khin's reluctance to fund UNU's initiative, this could be seen a couple different ways, and that's what I'm curious about. One way it could be seen is that U Ba Khin did not necessarily support or align with the particular method of Mahasi, and so didn't necessarily want to support that. Another way to see it is that U Ba Khin had a certain understanding of separation of church and state, and it didn't matter that Mahasi was the teacher. Any Buddhist initiative that was being funded by state money would be something that, as accountant general, U Ba Khin would have been a bit concerned about. So which of those two possibilities did you feel?
I think it is not against Mahasi. It is against the fact that meditation should be paid for by the government.
Right. And of course, UNU ended up making Buddhism a state religion, and not even beyond the religion. UNU famously said that if one member of every family in the country were a Vipassana meditator, that this would they would become a very stable state, and had this initiative to go and find the great and wise monks and teachers that could inspire this Vipassana revival within Burma. So he was really using these state initiatives to want to encourage a Vipassana practice among the laity. And so you're saying that U Ba Khin was a bit wary of those kind of ideas.
Yeah, because it was known that UNU was a spendthrift. Even as a student, when he was politically minded and the students were all poor, then his wife kept the money. That is German custom. The wife keeps the finances. And if UNU wants to do anything, even if he wants to invite his friends to a restaurant, the wife had to say, "Well, we have only 10 chat. What are you going to do?" Because UNU didn't really have a good relationship how to use money wisely. But I don't know. I searched many years because people have been asking me, particularly Ruth Dennis. She said, "Do you know what was the problem between Mahasi and U Ba Khin?" I said, "I don't know. I don't really know." And then later it was suggested to me, I think maybe by someone like Ukule or what, that Mahasi Sayadaw, when the layperson U Ba Khin put an obstacle to this support of by the government, then he shoved it off. Oh, what does he know? And so Mahasi may have been displeased with U Ba Khin about it, about the fact that he prevented UNU from putting up this idea. I don't know, because I do know that UNU helped Mahasi to visit Sri Lanka and all that other countries.
Right. And how about U Ba Khin's relation with Ne Win, and how and after Ne Win's takeover in 1962, in what ways did that impact U Ba Khin's life?
Well, amongst U Ba Khin's disciples, there was a single person who was a military man, a captain. He and his whole family, they were meditating. Only one. And UNU was never known as a Ne Win was never known as a religious person. His home was in the military compound, not so far from our house, but it was a very huge compound. So we only knew that is Ne Win's house. I don't think he came to our house, or at least I have never seen him. But Ne Win was known as having a very hot temper.
Yeah.
Now, when his children were noisy at Inya Road, then in a party, then he went to Inya Road and he slapped not only the children, he slapped the guests, including the foreign diplomats. This kind of thing, uncontrolled temper, and not religious-minded. But Aung Ji, that is Brigadier Aung Ji, who was close to Ne Win, he was a different person. My father had a lot of respect for him.
How so?
Yeah, because he had to do with the military. And he said, my stepfather said, the first misgivings he had of what was going to happen to the Burmese army was when Ne Win put Aung Ji into prison. U Ba Khin was not a military person at all. And he didn't have many disciples who were in the army. But that didn't affect him in the government until around about 65, 66. And by that time, he was already retired. In fact, when the military government took over, they examined the projects of the UNU government, and then they mostly used the accountant general to check the finances. And that had the result that U Ba Khin was in charge of the Buddha Sasana printing press, where all the Pali books are in a group of 5 who were all his disciples, and was under the military government of UNU in the early years. And when Goenka was successful in India, U Ba Khin has said, "Oh, I will go to India." That was shortly before his death. If he didn't die, he would probably try and get to India.
Wow, imagine that.
Yeah, he was so interested that he thought he should. Very encouraging of Goenka also. He used to write to Goenka that you are not doing this on your own. I'm behind you. You are doing it on my behalf. Don't worry. You will be successful.
Thank you for another session with sharing all this information. We could just go on and on. I know that we're coming up on your meditation time, so I want to let you go to be able to continue your own practice. And I look forward to continuing these conversations. This has been so delightful. So thanks again for sitting with us.
I have found that I think a lot about these years now because we have these talks.
Good.
And sometimes I know more about the actual circumstances that simply I didn't think about, which I haven't thought of. They come up now. No?
So we've just heard the second interview with Friedgard Lottermoser, the 1-hour interview. And I'm back with Ujagara, and we're going to be sharing some of our thoughts and commentary about what you've just heard, because as mentioned, there are so many layers, and her talk is so dense that I think further examination can bring to light some of the deeper things that she was exploring. So Ujagara, I'd like to ask you, as you listen to this the first time, I know you've listened to it several times since, but as you listened to it the first time, what really stood out to you?
Well, since I knew her personally, then speaking with her was more, meaningful. But still, by hearing again her stories, that were still a little bit different, but so much alive. What was striking to me, well, her experience with U Ba Khin, and for example, when she speaks about the meditation, and at some point U Ba Khin goes and he says, okay, now when you have the type of free flow and you don't have any blockage anywhere, then there is a kind of tipping with the mind on the area too, on the heart center. And then to see if there are any sankharas left. So this is interesting, for those who are advanced practitioner, and also this aspect of the heart center that was, very important when they were teaching over there. It came to be put aside a little bit because it can trigger very deep emotions on the yogis. So it's not so much use as a base, but still, it's very important because the heart is the base of the mind in itself, and this is where we can see very deep stuff that keeps us being alive with all our sankharas. That keeps us again, in this cycle of life and death. And what struck me also, is when she speaks about U Ba Khin and Mahasi. For myself, I was ordained with Mahasi Sayadaw in '79, so I know both camps. And from my point of view, although she definitely says that they were in very good term, I know also that Goenka Ji mentioned to me that U Ba Khin and my sister were in very good terms, and they were discussing, from time to time with each other. But what we can see from what she says is that in the background, U Ba Khin didn't approve so much of Mahasi's method. So I am wondering about that, and I think maybe U Ba Khin did not understand completely that method. And then the fact that he didn't approve, because this is what she says, we see that also in Goenka's presentation. Definitely, although he does not mention names, he speaks about these techniques that are involving with slow walking and all of that. And definitely, this is a characteristic of the Mahasi Sayadaw's method. So I think we can get prejudice. We can get an opinion that will not be in favor of exploring this type of meditation. Of course, if we are fine with the technique, if we are fine with the way of practice, then we go on, and we don't need to go trying to complement our practice here and there. But in any case, we should not have prejudice, and it's a path, it's a path that is a little bit different. Then, these two paths are different. One emphasizes more samadhi, more concentration, and for sure, Ba Khin and his disciple were very strong on samadhi, whereas the Mahasi's method is, the approach is more with the phenomena as they are. So samadhi by itself gets built up when someone is on the path of insight. So at the beginning, insight is not very strong, but the mind settles in one of these satipatthana bases, and then with careful observation and attention, then the samadhi somehow builds up, and it's a samadhi that is built with insight into the phenomena. So it may seem that it's not as deep as the jhanas and other aspects of samadhi, but still it can be enough. And commentaries, they definitely support that approach. So we have to acknowledge the difference with someone who approached the practice with samatha, a very good base of samadhi, and the approach of those who use kind of bare insight at the beginning, where the four elements, physical elements, are the foundation for building up your concentration. So these two approaches are a little bit different, but definitely complementary. And at the end, it comes to the same, because at the end, what needs to be seen is just the phenomena that they are, and these phenomena are just mind and matter. So as long as there is enough of clarity of mind, balance of mind, and concentration, the samadhi, then the results are also going to be good. So it is just, like for me, it's good. It is, after all these years, it's good to make peace with the different methods, and to credit them with what they are worth of. So I think this was something. And also she mentioned about, the Mahasi was very popular because in Burma, because of his position in the Sixth Council. He was the president, or the one who was the kind of a boss as for textual reference. So socially, he really became a big shot over there. So people wanted to support him with meditation center and all of that. And at some point, UNU wanted to give, to support him with the government fundings, and it got blocked because U Ba Khin was the accountant. But definitely, I think Joe, also you are on the Friedgard's opinion that U Ba Khin was very fair, and it is just that the government at that time could not afford itself to spend so much money in religious activities. So I don't think U Ba Khin was so straight that he would have respected any kind of spending that would have been logical according to the budget that they had. So I think this is it. Yeah, there are so many other details, like I know a lot of people that she spoke about. And what I remember also, I think in this episode, she says that when U Ba Khin secretly, we have to say secretly, because U Ba Khin also was very important. He had followers, and he had a big job in the government. So at some point, he decided to become a monk. Temporary ordination for about 1 week in the north, in the village of in Jinbin, where the Webu Sayadaw was. And she said that as a teenager, she was there, in Yangon, and she found out where he had gone, and very, very fast with Susu, her friend, they went over there to the village of Jinbin, and U Ba Khin was very upset because they had come, to his kind of a special and intimate ceremony where he will be away from all these duties and representation of officials. He will just take the robes and be a monk. Nevertheless, I'm sure it was okay. And then she was there, so she stayed there when U Ba Khin was a monk, and she practiced. And she described to me how Webu Sayadaw was instructing her, and how he was instructing them. And the method, if you don't know about the Webu Sayadaw, he is a specialist of anapanasati, and that's all what he's teaching, anapanasati. And to make it even more precise, anapanasati based on observation of the breath at the nostril area. So for those who know the Goenka method, is you do that kind of thing for the first 3 days, where you build up the samadhi, you observe the breath at the nostril and in that area, and after that you switch to a more global observation of phenomena with the vipassana throughout the body. So, but still, after all the time she was there, the Webu, he was against, so he did not speak at all about the sweeping in the body, the body scan. He didn't speak about it, so they were confused. She told me that they were confused. But again, we see here that it's a kind of misunderstanding of techniques, because later on I asked Goenka, himself. I said, well, it's very funny that U Ba Khin, we are told that his method is, body scan. It's really, his Vipassana is really based on going throughout the body and seeing the phenomena that they are, impermanence. But the Webu Sayadaw is just teaching Anapana. So how do you reconcile? How do you make peace with these two things? Since it was Webu Sayadaw who told U Ba Khin to start teaching, and Goenka said, well, it depends on people, and then people who have paramis, when they practice Anapanasati and they observe the breath at the nostril, but from there they can experience the whole body. But just by remaining in that area, they experience the in-breath, out-breath, but the whole body also is experienced at the same time. And this is what the commentaries, this is what they say. So it is just a practice that is completely natural. The more we observe, and then the more open we are, eventually the whole spectrum of phenomena that we know with our six senses become to be acknowledged, become to be investigated, and become to be understood. Nothing is missing. So the approaches, again, the approaches are different, but ultimately the understanding we have, it's about mind and matter, and what we are is just mind and matter. So this is when she narrated me the story at the Webu, it was very funny, because I was imagining the two girls, in that far off village in Burma, then following this big shot of U Ba Khin. And I think also we can understand that the kind of reticence, the kind of hesitation that U Ba Khin had in regard to teaching her, because she was the daughter of a diplomat, the daughter of a foreign special guest of the government, and then you had to be very careful. U Ba Khin was interested in her father, but he didn't want to have the children in his backyard. I mean, she was not the children, but definitely, it was not the official guest to the country. So this is one thing. Also, she mentioned, I think she says that U Ba Khin had a kind of hesitation again, and he sent her back because he didn't want to teach her. And she told me as well that U Ba Khin didn't like it because he felt that her parents didn't agree. So the parents didn't like so much her to go and practice meditation. Of course, I wondered about her mother, because her mother had gone with her at the center and did the first retreat. They did it together. So I wonder if she enjoyed it, if she understood something, but definitely the father didn't seem to have any kind of attraction for the practice, on the disappointment of U Ba Khin, right? So I think from this interview, I think that's the main thing that...
Right, and she makes clear in later interviews, as she goes into more detail about her life and her relations and experience, that you're right, U Ba Khin does lose interest in her, and even as in the commentary of our first episode with Corey Goldberg, he goes as far as to reference how his discomfort that it almost comes to be seen that she's something of a tool that U Ba Khin may see as possible to get to the stepfather, because it's the stepfather that he really feels a bond with and wants to bring into the fold, so to speak, and that once it becomes apparent that the stepfather, in fact, doesn't have an interest in meditation, there's some focus lost in Friedgard as a student. But this, again, goes back, on one hand, this, I think, is somewhat shocking to a student of Goenka today, that U Ba Khin is actually not interested in a student continuing meditation and not encouraging, even discouraging, at times even telling Friedgard to stop meditating because, for this or that reason. But on the side of Friedgard, it really shows, again, her level of dedication. The thing about, once these interviews come out in totality, I think one of the things that listeners will gain an understanding of is Friedgard is a strong-headed young Western woman in Burma in the 1960s who does not take no for an answer. Everywhere she goes, everyone says no to her. U Ba Khin says, no, you can't keep meditating. Webu says, no, you can't spend extended time here. Mahagandhiyon said, no, we've never had a woman stay at our premises. The German embassy says, no, we're not going to give you a visa to stay on here. And the military regime in Burma says, no, you foreigners now have to leave. And not even getting into the fact of the gender inequality in the Sangha, or what she had to deal with as, in some cases, of being the only foreigner in certain places. So everywhere she went, she was told no, and yet she just kept pushing until the door opened. And that's what was so remarkable, and that follows through in all aspects of her story. The other thing I want to pick on that you said early in your talk is you were discussing perhaps the early biases of U Ba Khin towards the Mahasi method, perhaps not totally understanding what the Mahasi method was as he criticized it, and Goenka then picking up that criticism and prejudice in his own discourses, and even though not referring to Mahasi by name, clearly talking about what he thinks the method is at the 10-day courses. And I think that's another reason, another thread I want to pull out, because it's another reason why these interviews are so important, is they reveal where we got to today. And as these interviews continue, it's really fascinating to begin to understand, as a student of S.N. Goenka's Vipassana Meditation and Organization, to begin to see how Goenka formed this movement and this practice that he did, where his thinking was borrowed and inspired and instructed by U Ba Khin, and also where it diverged. And even in this episode, I think she gives one small example. She goes into further detail later on, but going into greater detail of where the Goenka movement started to do things in a different way, and unique way, than what we saw at IMC and with U Ba Khin. Of course, many similarities, but where there are also divergences. And I think it's the divergences that are especially important, because this is an organization whose methodology, I often say mythology, tends to promote this thinking of a non-changing singularity that what is now is what always was. And so as we get these firsthand accounts of really describing the culture and the personality and the techniques and the relations, things that have really never been known before that I've ever seen or heard of about IMC, it gives this extraordinary view and understanding of going back in time and understanding this environment and these people, and being able to hear clearly and see where how this current movement with Goenka, what decisions and choices they made that in some cases veered away from, sometimes perhaps one can argue out of necessity, but certainly veered away from what you would find with IMC and U Ba Khin. And indeed, this was the only reason why Friedgard did not want these interviews published in her lifetime, as she did not want to face consequences, so to speak, for telling her truth and remembering her time in IMC in the form of being banned from future long courses from the organization. And that was why we agreed to pause or to to wait to publish until after she passed. As I told her at the time, I was heartbroken because I wanted, everyone to see just how remarkable she was while she was still alive. But those were her wishes. And one more thing I'd like to add to that: when we talk about trying to understand our present and where we are now with the different mindfulness meditation organizations, teachings, lineages, but more than that, ways of thinking, conditioning, ways of orienting yourself towards what the practice is and how to think about it. I'm also recalling this interview I did with Mirka Nasser, who is the biographer of Munindra. And she talks about the friendship between Munindra and Goenka, especially in India and Bodh Gaya, and then later in Igatpuri. But in talking about the friendship, she also talks about the distinction of Goenka obviously being very attached and focused on his singular method with a certain kind of discomfort about other techniques and other teachers, whereas Munindra is very open and wanting to explore, wanting to pick up other practices and learn as much as he can. And Mirka identifies this dichotomy through the friendship as something really beautiful, something how they both had their own way of practice and their own way of seeing it, but they still came together as these Dhamma friends, which I definitely support and I think is also quite wonderful. At the same time, I think that this study of these two very influential teachers and everything that came after them and understanding who they were at their place of time, as I said in my interview with Mirka, this is almost kind of showing where the meditation movement started to flow into the US, because of course Goenka and his students to this day have become more fundamental and more focused on the pristine purity and the singularity of their technique, more discomfort with kind of and more closed off from outside discussions and conversations with the wider Theravada Buddhist Vipassana meditation community, whatever you want to call it, whereas the influences of Munindra have I would say have embodied more of that greater openness and exploration and discovery of an interest in other kinds of practices and seeing the value of understanding different traditions. I don't say that to highlight one being better or worse. There are certainly advantages and disadvantages both ways of having a technique and really staying with it and delving deep into it, and especially if that works for you. And there's also advantages in having that open mind. I think they're both tools to use in different ways. It's more of an objective commentary on seeing how the dichotomy of the friendship of these two individuals, how it then led in some ways to where we are now. And I think that's also what we see in what you were referring to as U Ba Khin's relationship with Mahasi, but also his relationship with Mahasi's teachings, how his understanding, or as you suggest, perhaps misunderstanding, how that influenced the later mission of Goenka. So yeah, there's a lot there.
Yes, there is a lot there. And we can be reminded that a tradition is something that is alive. And to keep alive, somehow, although it carries its past on its shoulder, it should be new. So it has to be creative. And this is what we find, the possibility to adapt to new cultures, to new epoch, to new time in history. This is where a tradition is able to keep its originality and its aliveness. So it's interesting when we look, on history, on all kinds of, whatever we are looking at, we see the different directions and the different kind of interest that some schools developed, and how they contradicted or they oppose one another, but eventually we see that it's a dynamic. All these things, this is, the disagreement can be very positive. It can be very creative also, because it forces people to be very clear of what they are standing for, and that's it. So. Yeah. So I think we have to keep open and still, be dedicated in knowing what we do, and then to do it well. I think we should never stop inquiring about what we are doing and why we are doing that. Somehow I think these episodes just gives us also a context, the context in which these schools express themselves in the last century, in this century also. So it's important for us to see that contexts are different. The societies of Burma or India in the mid 90s, they were quite different than what is now. So, from our judgment, we can say that these people were very narrow-minded and, they had a very limited vision. But if we look at them in their own culture, they were really opened. So that's why, it's kind of relative, and we should never put a story outside the context in which it was created. So
I think that's very true. And I also want to prompt you here, because another insight of this discussion that you shared with me after listening was regarding the bar of soap that Mother Sayama mentions and the interpretation of that. So I'd like to prompt you to share that here.
Yes, because you said I think she says yes, when Mother Sayama, she was with her husband, and the husband, Uchiten, had come back from his meditation and was very devoted, and then they were lying down in their bed having a rest in the evening, and then she asked him how he practices, the meditation, and he gives him just very brief instructions, and then she puts her mind on the, on the place, the area of the mouth where she was observing her breath, and then all of a sudden a big light came, and actually she said she saw a bar of soap. But it's funny because if you have been living there, in Asia, you see that there is a kind of a soap brand that is called Sunlight. So over there in Burma, you had the life boy, which was very common, but the Sunlight was a bit more rare, and it was very bright. So the name itself, is a synonym of light. So what she was saying and what she saw was, of course, maybe a bar of soap, but it was more the luminosity of the object that would have been translated as a bar of soap. So if anyone sees a bar of soap in your meditation, well, I hope it's going to be a very sunny one.
That's very interesting. There is one other thing I realized I want to ask you. One of the things I was struck by listening to it this recent time that I didn't catch in the previous other listings was the dichotomy and the contrast that she sets up, I think maybe even inadvertently or unintentionally. On one hand, as we've mentioned before, she references her difficulty in continuing to practice at IMC and under U Ba Khin, and U Ba Khin's actually flat out discouragement at one point to not to keep up the practice, and then on the other hand, she references how when the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi came to Yangon, he stayed at Goenka's house, but also that Goenka's family, she isn't quite clear whether Goenka himself did this, but certainly his family then took meditation courses with him. And U Ba Khin, and she stresses here really that how shocked she was that U Ba Khin gave permission for these family members of Goenka to take those courses and then to come back and join the IMC courses, because usually he was quite strict with students not mixing practices, famously, and that's something that's carried on with the Goenka organization. So this was quite a remarkable relaxation of the rules that were given, and I believe that Friedgard suggests that one of the reasons for this is this understanding that Goenka might be an important figure in the organization and the movement, and that being able to accommodate or acquiesce to his family might make that relationship easier going forward. And so in some ways, when you look at the contrast between these decisions being a bit harder and more pushing away a bit of Friedgard when her stepfather is not interested and that's not really serving his purposes or IMC, but then on the other hand, doing the opposite with Goenka's family, accommodating, going beyond the rules to accommodate. These are two very different strategies for different people that are also having a different impact on the center and the mission going forward. So I wonder what your thoughts are on thinking back to U Ba Khin's decision in these two cases.
Yes, and I know, like you speak about Friedgard. So at some point, and also when she discussed about her practice, it seemed that she had it very easy, and it just flew, and she had a very deep experience in a very short while. But when she talked to me, she said that she had a very hard time with meditation, and she was not a good yogi, right? And the reason is that because she is very intelligent and very analytical, so she always wanted to understand. I mean, this is why also people who are so stubborn come to do a PhD. So somehow, the more you are thinking and analyzing and wanting to understand, makes what you're observing a little bit more complicated. So somehow this brought more difficulties on our path. So it doesn't matter. It's our path, and this is how we progress. The way that whichever amount of understanding we want to have. And in regard to Maharishi Yogi, I was told also by Goenka, is that at the beginning his wife, Mrs. Goenka, she could not meditate. It was very difficult for her to meditate. So Goenka said, well, you just go with Maharishi Yogi, and he's going to give you some mantras, and you go on with that. So this is also not only U Ba Khin who didn't have anything to say against that, but Goenka himself encouraged his wife to practice mantras, at the beginning. And I think if people know what they are doing, then at some point they can investigate possibilities of enlarging a little bit their practice. But the main reason why U Ba Khin permitted it is that at least people will have had the taste of what is meditation. So whatever type of meditation, you start with that, and then you see what it brings to your life, the change that it gives to your mind. So from there, then you can go on with your search and with your inquiry, and then also with your practice, and maybe try something that could be better. So I think supporting that kind of initial practice with mantras, knowing that many of them are going to listen to what Goenka has to say, and also try what he proposes as method, because he had done, I'm sure, I think he did also mantras somehow before, so he was more in favor of what he is teaching, what he had been teaching with U Ba Khin. So I think there are many methods, many approaches, and we have to find what is the best for us.
And I think this contrast also in some ways shows U Ba Khin's strategic thinking in terms of where to be a bit harder in the rules and where to relax them a little. That's what I found so fascinating when juxtaposing these side by side, these two cases.
Well, yes, but also, is that U Ba Khin was dealing with a very limited amount of people, so it was easy for him to adjust his teaching and also his discipline in regard to people coming to him. Sometimes you had students who were there just for a few days, and some were for a longer period of time. So I think when it came to be formalized, because although it is said that even Sayatet, was giving 7 days retreats, I think they were very flexible in the sense that they were having a place, they were having a center, and then people could come for just a minimum of time, and then the teacher will be able to adjust his teaching according to the time available to these students. So in this way, Ba Khin could afford much more liberty, much more freedom as for the discipline. But Goenka with the organization that he came to put together required a much more strict discipline, and then it required also a kind of uniformity with the instructions and the discourses, and he made we could say he marketed he made it a market product of the market somehow. So he was a very good businessman in this way, because it really sold out, it became very popular. But it was because of that the presentation that was really well organized and systematic, and you have the rules, and this is what you do. You trust it, and you follow the discipline that is required in the retreats and in the practice itself.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Insight Myanmar Podcast. Each episode we produce is offered freely and always will be. Our goal is to inform, engage, and inspire as many people as possible with stories from voices that matter. And thanks to your support, we've been able to reach tens of thousands of listeners across the globe. This is truly remarkable. But to sustain this momentum, we do need your help. Even if a small percentage of our listeners committed to a very modest monthly pledge, we would not only be able to sustain our momentum, but grow. Even better, you might consider becoming a member to deepen your engagement with this platform and thereby gaining access to additional content and other exclusive benefits. So if you found value in what we offer and want to help secure the future of this work, however you want to make that happen, please visit insightmyanmar.org/donation to make a pledge, or navigate to insightmyanmar.org/membership to look at our member options. With your help, we can keep this work alive and thriving.
Yeah.